Your Serene Highness, thank you. Yes, we can upload this video. Your Serene Highness, Your Excellency, Mr. Pierre Datou, Minister of State, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants and dear friends, welcome to our seminar today, Northbound, the North Sea and the Arctic Ocean, Threats and Solution. We'd like to thank Dutch Maritime Production for this video, introducing the seminar and giving us an idea of what we'll be talking about today. It was specially produced for the seminar, and you can find it on the website of the Oceanographic Museum. My name is Leila Gandhi, and I have the privilege to be your host today in this iconic place of Monaco, Monaco Oceanographic Museum. Before we start, and first of all, I like to start with this, I would like you to give yourself a big round of applause, please. Because usually we applaud other people, but I think you also deserve it, because if you're here, it means you care. If you're here, it means you're a concerned citizen. So thank you for being here, because we have to be every day more and more. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. So I'd like to thank each one of you in this room. We are around 200 people in the room and thousands of people watching us live on the streaming platform on YouTube. So thank you to everyone. I'd like to say that as a Monegasque, as an explorer, as a media professional, and above all, as someone committed for the protection of the environment, I feel so proud that Monaco has become this wild world leader in terms of this common fight for the protection of the environment. Indeed, because centuries ago, His Serene Highness, Prince Albert I, was known as being the father of the modern oceanography. He was, and still is, such an inspiration. He has contributed so much into raising awareness, into collecting scientist data. Thanks to him, we even have a glacier in the Spitsberg named after Monaco. And people say it's one of the biggest and one of the most beautiful. Because, indeed, we have to know better our oceans for the sake of the humanity. We have to protect them. We can only agree with that. But you know what? Agreeing is not enough. Someone once said, and I quote, maybe you know who it is, you tell me, I quote, "Let us be careful of easy words and declarations of principle with no follow-up. Let us find the moral and political strength to apply the prescribed remedies so as to save the essential. It is up to us, chiefs of states, to seize together this chance of long-term revival of our blue planet, and so allow our children and future generations to evolve in a healthier and more equitable world." Who said that? It's His Serene Highness, the Prince Rainier III, at the United Nations Conference in Rio in 1992. This is why today, Monseigneur, we thank you so much for your leadership and commitment, because you too have the courage of always saying we need less words and more actions. And active indeed you are, both personally and both politically as a leader, because under your leadership, Monaco is at the cutting edge of developing and successfully implementing sustainable policies and practices. And personally, because what a better example than to know that you are the first and only head of state to have reached both South and North Pole. So less words, more actions, more solutions is one of the motto of Monaco. I'd like you to ask, please raise your hand if you watch the movie Don't Look Up. Who watched the movie Don't Look Up? It is about this today, I feel. And by the way, yesterday at Bibliothèque Notari, there was a very interesting debate on this movie. Because today we have enough data, although we never have too much. We have enough data, we have the knowledge. The IPCC produced dozens of reports saying that we have no more time. It's time now, never, now or never. Scientists often tell us we don't know what to do anymore. We have told everything. We have the data. We have the consequences. We have everything. Why do we fail into taking real action? When are we actually live in a more sustainable way? For example, one of the latest US studies has shown that if we reduce by 75% our meat consumption, we could actually tackle the climate change. So here is a solution, just dropping it here. We can implement it easily today and globally, and it has a great impact, because global warming is not an abstract and faraway concept. Climate change is not only about polar bear not finding habitat. And sea level rise is not only about having an hour sand trap on our summer holidays. It actually clearly means it will and still have a direct impact and concrete effect on our life, on our economy, on our food, on our water supplies, on our health, for us and for the children. And today, this decade, 2021-2030, is actually the UN Ocean Decade. But please, again, less words and more action. Today, more than ever, we need to acknowledge the fact that we have to take action. This is what we are going to talk about today: actions and solutions. Taking it back to Monaco, it's also a motto here in Monaco with the Monaco Exploration Platform, who works for the common good. It's a quest based on humanism and scientific truth that combines political commitment at the highest level, a high-quality scientific research, and awareness raising among the public. So, what better place than Monaco, indeed, to hold this seminar? I don't think there is. This is what we're going to be talking about today with our participants, with our experts known and famous all around the world. First, we will start with we have the great honor and privilege of having His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco here with us today, who will give an opening speech. And again, thank you so much for your presence and for your leadership in this issue. Then we'll have Dr. Peter Erzig, who will deliver some introductory remarks, and Professor Tinka Murk on biodiversity, Professor Mojib Latif on how North Sea and Arctic are actually facing and responding to climate change. Then we will have a fascinating panel discussion. We'll travel the world with explorers, and they will tell us how explorers can actually help in finding solutions, in collecting priceless data. We have with us Professor Ulrike Wolff-Thomsen, who will talk about the power of art to raise awareness. And again, closing word by Peter Herzig. So we will not only portray the situation, because I think we know the situation. We will propose actions and solutions. We will give you the energy to eventually become an even more concerned citizen. And we will give you, we hope, the hope that things can change for the best if only we want to. We want to go beyond borders. We want to provide a source of inspiration and to show the synergy that there is between different seas. The seminar is held in the context of the exhibition Northbound, Connected by the Sea, by the Museum Kunst der Boskunst, which will stay here until the 19th of June. So if you didn't have the opportunity to see all this art, you can do it. It's co-organized by the Oceanographic Museum Institute, Prince Albert I of Monaco, represented by the CEO, Mr. Robert Calgagno, and also with the Museum Kunst der Boskunst, represented by its director, Professor Ulrike Wolff-Thomsen, and of course with the great support of Professor Paulsen, who is the founder of the museum. This program is directed by Peter Herzig, former executive director of GEOMAR. We will meet him later. And it has been designed to be dynamic, interactive, conversational. So please, if you have any comment, any questions, anything to share with us, raise your hand. You can express yourself. And if you need any translation, there are headsets available at the back, so feel free. At the end, you will be invited for le verre de l'amitié, because we need amitié, we need dialogue, we need solution, we need synergy, and these are some of the keywords of this seminar. We hope that you will enjoy and actively contribute to this debate, because we need to work all together if we want to change the things. And before diving into the ocean, into the sea, into the discussion, the panel, the presentation, it's my great honor to welcome on stage His Serene Highness, the Prince Albert II of Monaco, for the opening speech.
Monsieur le ministre d'État, Monsieur l'ambassadeur de Norvège, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les consuls, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers amis. Je suis heureux de vous accueillir aujourd'hui à l'occasion de cet après-midi.
I am very happy to welcome you today to Monaco on the occasion of this afternoon of reflection and discussion devoted to the threats facing the North Sea and the Antarctic Ocean, as well as to the existing solutions which will allow us to respond to these challenges. The idea of holding the seminar was born as a result of the exhibition Northbound Connected by the Sea, organized by the Oceanographic Institute, Albert I, Prince of Monaco Foundation, and you can see it on the walls of this room. I had the pleasure of integrating the exhibition in March during the Monaco Blue Initiative. As some of you know, every year we have organized this forum of discussion around the major issues facing the seas and the ways in which we can take better account of them. For this occasion, I could tell how art is a catalyzer, not only capable to move people, but to raise awareness and to spark dialogue and arise the desire to build together concrete solutions to confront these challenges. This exhibition is supposed to be continued today by this seminar. I would like to thank the organizers, the Oceanographic Institute, the Museum Kunst der Westguts, which I have mentioned. I would like to thank Professor Frederik Paulsen, Professor Peter Erzig, not forgetting the teams of the GEOMAR Helmholtz Centre for Ocean Research in Kiel, Helmholtz Centre for Polar and Marine Research, as well as all the high-quality speakers who we will hear in a few minutes: Professor Antje Boetius, Tinka Murk, Ulrike Wolff-Thomsen, Mojib Latif, and Mr. Arved Fuchs and Boris Herrmann. Of course, I would like to thank all the participants who today honor us with the pleasure of their presence. Throughout our discussion, each other's various points of view, we will be speaking about two marine areas, the North Sea and the nearby Arctic on the one hand, and the Mediterranean Sea on the other hand. Two areas which have so much in common despite the distance between them, and which have so much to gain by comparing our experiences. Our purpose will then be to gain a better understanding of the common hardships which these spaces are undergoing, for these often stem from the same causes, our behaviors, and the effects of our civilization and our lifestyle. This organization of the coastlines, this ever-expanding traffic, pollution, climate change, those produce the same consequences: water acidification, weakened ecosystems, overexploited resources, a damaged seabed. And finally, in the face of these problems, we together identify solutions which have been possible to test there and that can be also tested here in the Mediterranean. Solutions which we have each and every one observed and on which feedback is particularly valuable. For these badly damaged regions are also laboratories for solutions. Men and women, and we have fine examples, are not always destructive. Fortunately, we sometimes want to repair, protect, build solutions, like, for example, the marine protected areas, which we'll talk about much. It's about regulations of maritime traffic, which are slowly taking shape, management of fishing, which is making progress. In the light of these solutions and to promote them, that we have the necessity to act together. I'm thinking particularly about negotiations on climate change or biodiversity. For many years, I have been fighting for the inclusion of maritime issues in the international discussions devoted to these topics. To be a proactive force together, this seminar must be instrumental in pooling our problems and solutions. It represents a straight continuation of the exhibition, that of a sea that connects more than continents, latitudes, and climates, connects men and women, and connects them to nature, begging for them to act. And on a broader level, it represents a continuation of the strong ties which my Prince Albert I was able to establish on the shores of the North Sea during his many voyages there, either on his way to Kiel or to break the journey on the route leading him to the Arctic. For all these reasons, I know that this afternoon will be fruitful in the service of our seas and for the good of all. Thank you all.
Thank you, Monseigneur, for this inspiring speech, as usual. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to someone I like to call him Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, he has a beard makes me look him even wiser, because he has been named Ambassador of the European Union, Maritime Ambassador of the European Union in 2007. He's gonna share with us some introductory remarks. For many years, he was the director of the famous GEOMAR Centre for Ocean Research in Germany. He is now consultant to various institutions and organizations, as well as in the maritime industry. And he received many distinctions internationally. He is an inspiration. He directed this program. He was awarded the first-class Order Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany by the German president. And in 2021, he was appointed Knight of the Order of St. Charles by his Sovereign Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco. I'd like to call him Mr. Ambassador Peter Erzig. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Leiter, for your kind words. Monseigneur, Excellencies, Professor Paulsen, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be able to say a few words here today at the beginning of our special seminar on the North Sea and the Arctic. As you know, the North Sea is a unique region of the Atlantic Ocean, because it connects 7 different countries in Europe. And this is the UK, Norway, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. And therefore, the North Sea is a truly Northern European maritime area. And this is why we are having this seminar here today. But the North Sea is also one of the busiest marine industry areas in the world. It is also a major area for recreation and tourism. So in this context, the ecosystems of the North Sea and the nearby Arctic call for practical solutions. We have heard about solutions today already, in order to combine economic use and the protection of the marine ecosystem. This is the challenge, to combine the use of the ocean, economic use of the ocean, and the protection of the marine biodiversity. The 7 countries bordering the North Sea share a diverse and, as you know, rich cultural heritage, which is ranging from pre-Viking times until today. And the Wadden Sea, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the North Sea, is the largest intertidal ecosystem of this kind in the world. So the North Sea is indeed very special. And again, this is the reason for having this seminar here today. On the other hand, unfortunately, the North Sea is under extreme external pressure. Sea level rise, overfishing, loss of biodiversity, acidification, decrease of oxygen, plastic and nutrient pollution, as well as global warming are issues that are threatening not only the world oceans, but in particular also the North Sea. So it's a complicated situation. Our seas and oceans, as you know, are simply too warm, they are too high, and they are too acid. They are overfished, they lack oxygen, and in the future, they may have more plastics than fish. However, as also mentioned before, the North Sea, and this is another reason for having this seminar here today, is also a sea of solutions in order to find a combination of use and protection of the marine ecosystem. So the maritime industry and the marine ecosystem have to go together. Marine protected areas, Monseigneur has pointed that out already, marine spatial planning, wind parks without fishing, new concepts for offshore aquaculture and other activities currently minimize the ecological footprint of the blue economy in the North Sea. So we are making progress. The North Sea is also known as a sea of energy. Oil and gas have been the major energy sources so far. However, nowadays we have large-scale offshore wind farms, we have the potential of wave and tidal energy, and there are also new concepts of storing CO2 beneath the seafloor, and all this is currently being explored. So the North Sea is also a laboratory sea where we are trying things, we will try to improve certain things. And obviously the oil and gas industry is beginning to turn into a truly green, renewable industry, leaving oil and gas behind and giving biodiversity a new chance. Climate change and the connection of the North Sea to the Arctic have resulted in major shifts of biodiversity. Some fish stocks are moving north towards colder environments, and they are partly replaced by more southern ocean species. And this is a subject of marine biological research. This is a focus for marine biological research because those are important changes in biodiversity which potentially can have an impact on marine life and also the world food supply. And finally, the North Sea is known as a rough, as an unpredictable and dangerous sea by fishermen in particular. Hundreds of whalers have lost their lives in early times in the North Sea and the Arctic, and also today, the North Sea remains to be a sea of challenges in many different aspects. And we will be looking at some of the aspects today. Sea level rise, another special issue, is a major threat to coastal areas in the North Sea. In an innovative project to build two dams in the English Channel between France and England, as well as Scotland and Norway, is currently being discussed in order to protect about 25 million people living in coastal communities in Northern Europe who are potentially affected by sea level rise. Two dams in the English Channel. On the first glance, the Mediterranean Sea and the North Sea do not appear to have much in common. However, as Monseigneur pointed out, best practice examples developed independently in both areas can potentially help us to achieve a sustainable coexistence of use and protection, not only in the North Sea and not only in the Mediterranean, but also in other parts of the world. And given all this, I think we're all looking forward now to learn more about the North Sea and the Arctic from our exceptional speakers and experts. And at this point, I hand things back over to Laila Gandhi. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much. And you, as a senior advisor to the Oceanographic Institute, Prince Albert I Foundation, he is a friend of the Institute and he knows how much we work together for a better future. And our next expert is a restorer. She wants to restore the ecosystem and the biodiversity. She says that we are living a biodiversity crisis, but we can change the course of things. She is advocating for nature-inclusive development, smart design. She will have a lot of good ideas to share with us of concrete things we can actually develop to make the ecosystem restored. She is full professor at Marine Animal Economy at the Wageningen University. She chairs the Scientific Advisory Board of Dutch North Sea Foundation. She has published over 200 scientific papers and books. And in 2002, she was awarded the grant for excellent female scientist. please welcome on floor Tinka Murk. Professor Tinka Murk, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Is it working? Yes, okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for allowing me to be here in this very special place. So inspiring to meet all the people and hear all the ideas. My subject already was greatly introduced by the video made by Claudie Bartelink about the beauty of the North Sea, the challenges, and also the potential solutions of the North Sea. And she's a very cool woman that I met twice on a North Sea diving expedition to remove fishing gear from shipwrecks, where I studied mainly how animals use these reefs. And she was mastering those huge cameras and making the videos. And yeah, her dream is to make a real North Sea documentary to bring the North Sea in the hearts of the people. Because that's the issue. The things that are happening there are not visible. If this would happen in nature resorts, the Veluwe, somewhere on land, people will respond immediately. I would like to tell more about the North Sea and the discussions going on, discussions how to solve things, how to bring things further. And first, of course, we are in a time of many crises that people worry about. The COVID crisis, well, you can wash your hands there and wear a face mask. But then we have the recession, the climate change, and that was introduced. And there is an increasing awareness that we need to reduce fossil energy use. And in the Netherlands, this is greatly enhanced by the current war going on. Everyone wants to stop using fossil energy. And an important option we consider in the Netherlands is to make use of offshore wind. And here, this was an exhibition in Rotterdam in 2016, and they already projected what it would mean if we would get all our energy from offshore wind. And at the left, you see all these red things that is distribution network for oil and gas. And it's almost gone here and replaced by distribution network for energy generated via offshore wind. And here, the important representatives of the European states came there to get inspired. But of course, it's quite something if you look at the sea with all those offshore wind farms. We have our own piece of the North Sea, and it's quite busy, as you can see, and this is only part of what's happening there. In addition to our ambition to make it offshore wind production area, the North Sea and many other seas have different issues that were already mentioned. For instance, we mine sand to strengthen our coast. The Netherlands is pretty low, so we are quite worried what will happen. But there are things like underwater noise, potential effects of electromagnetic fields. If you have all those power cables that bring the energy to the shore, there will be electromagnetic fields, and sharks and rays sense their prey under the sand by sensing their electromagnetic fields. The question is, how do they experience these huge cables lying there? Seagrass areas are lost, estuaries are closed to protect the Netherlands. So this used to be an area where migrating fish could get in and out, sturgeon, salmon. It's not possible anymore because of our safety. New species are being introduced or just come here from the southern European seas, and they find their place also in the North Sea. But actually what is really worrying now is the biodiversity collapse, because the biodiversity is not just fun, it's not just beautiful to look at, to learn about, but it's also protecting us from pests. It's also helping the environment adapting to the new conditions, to the climate change. Nature can take care of itself as long as we don't frustrate that option. So the biodiversity collapse is really something serious that we want to tackle. In the Netherlands, we consider that there are 3 main transitions going on at the North Sea that we need to think about. One is the energy transition that I already talked about, the nature transition, because it's really deteriorated. Large parts of the seafloor is just sand with flatfish living there. And we have to change the food production. We are mainly harvesting, still in the hunter-gathering stage, like on land we stopped doing thousands of years ago. There was no transition yet, so that has to come. And then against the background of the climate change, making the water not only warmer, but also much wilder. There are more storms, and of course the sea level will rise. And it's not just the Netherlands with our own piece of the North Sea that have plans, but also the neighbors have plans. And we are kind of aware, but when we think about our options, we tend to focus on the Dutch piece of the North Sea. But, well, this is beautiful animal, the blue skate or the common skate, which is totally not common anymore. The skate can have a width of almost 3 meters. And of course, the skate doesn't mind in what part of the North Sea it is. This is the UK. They probably are still born here, and sometimes they catch one here, but they are very, very rare. So nature doesn't mind economic exclusive zones. In our planning, we should take care of how the system works, the whole North Sea system. So, we all do all these things, and we have all these countries and all these species that are almost disappearing. Can we do something about it? How can we approach this without going crazy? Well, to explain that, I have this beautiful scenery of the North Sea, but to make it easier to discuss, I made it into a puzzle with 6 pieces. 6 pieces that concern the aspects of the energy production at sea, the combination with food provisioning that we are looking for, the stressors that are being posed upon the North Sea ecology. We try to reintroduce hard structures to restore habitat. We care about the biodiversity and somehow want to strengthen that again. And of course, there are many stakeholders that have interests, policymakers that need to find solutions, and spatial planning that has to be made, and fast, because we want offshore sustainable energy. To start with the energy puzzle piece, we talk mainly about wind turbines, wind energy. However, the question is, how much energy can the sea generate? And people that started to calculate this said, perhaps it's not as much as we hope. Someone should calculate this. But what you also can do is combine it with, for instance, floating solar panels. And in the Netherlands, we have currently experiments going on with those floating solar panels. And of course, fish will use it, they will be underneath, birds will sit on it, maybe pollute it a bit. Things are happening there, but we are trying, and you could combine it in this offshore wind park, because the turbines are 500 meters and later even a kilometer away from each other. Another option is to use tidal energy, lunar energy. So if you would have a dam with huge rotor blades that will not chop porpoises and seal and divers to pieces, you could make use of the 6 hours that the current goes this way and the 6 hours that it goes the other way. It is very predictable, so you know exactly how much current you will get. And on the dam, which will be about 3 meters above sea level, you could have perhaps a factory where extra energy is stored in hydrogen or ammonia, which is very useful for ships that can come here and tank some energy and continue again. So it's not just wind, but we are looking for options to combine. The other side of the picture is that we need to protect biodiversity, to conserve biodiversity, help it further. Of course, we need to monitor what is happening and also realize that part of the North Sea is very dynamic. We need protected areas for just sand because, for instance, this ocean quahog, there is one found that was 507 years old, but it will never become even 20 years old if you have a bottom trawling going 10 times a year through that area. So if you want these animals, and for instance the whelk, that is a predatory snail that can easily become 25 years old and hunts for all kinds of invertebrates, you need to be able to protect that area from seafloor damage. The stressors that we are considering for this wind energy is to start with collision of bats. So I never knew, but bats fly all the way from the Netherlands to the UK and back again, and they can be chopped because they are somehow attracted to these wind turbines. Also birds, there are periods when you have a lot of migration, and then they must either shut down the rotor blades or develop ways to deter them. So they will not be chopped by the rotor blade. So these are things that worry. Also the geophysical effects can be great. So the sea is mixed in a different way, the sand distribution will be different. That will have consequences. We know things will change. It doesn't mean it's bad, but it is different. There are advantages because if ships can't go there to trawl, then you have effective seafloor protection. You can also have less noise from shipping because shipping makes an incredible noise. And here you see a porpoise with ear protection, but fish are very sensitive for shipping noise as well, and it's exactly in their hearing range, so their communication will be disrupted unless they adapt. So noise also is a serious potential stressor. In the meantime, we try to find ways to bring back a bit of the hard structures that were all taken out of the sea by this bottom trawling, the sea stones that you can find back in the gardens. That came with the glaciers. They were hotspots for marine life. And we are now trying different shapes that also have a function for housing fish that can keep things clean. So it's our personnel, actually, of the sea. Sometimes we put oysters on in the hope that they will spread from there, start making new reefs. Also, we work on new materials because concrete has a very high CO2 footprint. So if you can, for instance, use a bio-inspired product like what the sandcastle worm does. It has a kind of two components glue that it uses to make these robust sandcastles that is as hard as concrete. And then you don't need this concrete to bring it from somewhere, but you can use local materials, shells, old corals that are dead to glue it together into reefs. We call it reef glue. You need to monitor what's happening because so much is changing. And that can be done with cameras. Also in 1 liter of water, we can, within 2 hours, determine what fish, what other animals have been swimming there. So if you go there as a diver, you scare them away. But if you take your liter up, filter it, do the test, then you find out there were many more animals than you as a diver have seen. Also sound. We know that birds make sounds. You can recognize a blackbird or a great tit from the sound, but it's the same with fish. They have communication via sounds. You can make use of that by having fish biodiversity monitors with all these different sensors. The combination with food provisioning offers a lot of opportunities because, for instance, under these floating solar panels, you can have mussels, hanging culture. They don't need light, and fish can be in between. At the sea floor, where nobody can go to damage it, you could have culture of, so free culture, the sea ranching, so not keeping them in cages, putting food in, polluting the environment. But you will have development of a lot of species that belong in the North Sea, that can live their own life, and some are being harvested. And finally, it's important that all these developments are discussed with those stakeholders. The companies that are responsible for the shipping, for the fishing, legislation needs to enable this, because now we still have the law that if you put something there, like a gas platform, then you have to remove it as soon as the extraction stops. And it's so beautiful. That's where the life is. Formally, we have to remove it. Well, I really hope, as an ecologist, we don't have to remove that. So, something that looks so complicated can still be organized, because we don't need to micromanage nature. Nature can take care of itself very well. Nature will use new opportunities, old opportunities. Some developments we can't change, they are a fact. Some developments should be smartly designed, and you cannot do everything everywhere. You have to choose wisely. If you concentrate food production, you should have places where nobody does anything, where nature can take its course. That combination is really important. There will be innovations. It's not just wind energy. There will be new forms of energy. So we shouldn't plan everything only based on one technology. And of course, the North Sea and any other sea doesn't mind exclusive economic zones. We see that climate change will drive many species northward. If the cod will disappear, we get the hake. It's a related fish, same roles, same use of the reef. You can even eat it. It's a very good fish. Yeah, that's how things change, and it should adapt. And of course, many countries face comparable puzzle challenges, so we should collaborate much more and make use of what's already known. To finish with the recipe, it's very easy for a healthy, productive, and resilient marine ecosystem. You must have enough habitat. Enable nature to use those habitats. The habitats should be large enough, of good quality. And of course, animals must be able to go from one habitat to the other. So this huge common skate, even as a baby, it's so big that it would immediately end up in fishing nets for flatfish. So there may be periods where you can't fish there if they have to migrate. That is what you can organize. There should be top predators, so please don't catch away all top predators for fisheries, but get them from the different levels of the food web, so the ecology can act if there are new species, non-indigenous species. They don't have to become a pest, as long as it can be corrected, and they get their little place in the food web. We should not have pollution, not chemical pollution, not noise pollution, not electromagnetic field pollution, because that will hamper the natural development of the ecosystem. And if you think about the ecological opportunities right from the start, that's where you can make improvement, not at the very end. Oh yeah, we make this bid for an offshore wind farm. How can we add something for nature? Let's put some tubes for housing. And last, we should learn from the past, act in the present, and go for a biodiverse future that is always different than the past. We should not strive for the past, but go forward to the new situation and be amazed what nature does. Within half a year, it already is so beautiful. So we should not forget two other transitions that we are not talking about so much. The social economic transition, because you have new jobs, but you also lose jobs. You should have a governance transition supporting the developments, and we all must help to make these developments nature inclusive so that the future seas with the coast, with the estuaries, we need them, thriving again and safe. And this is the North Sea about 10,000 years ago. And people were walking around there, and the common skate definitely wasn't there. Thank you. Any questions?
We will have the question afterwards. So please write down any question you might have for Professor Tinka Murk, because at the end we will give you the floor. But without further ado, I would like to share with you a very short video, 2.5 minutes. It's our next guest. Actually, he would have loved to be with us today, but he's a professional sailor, and he's right now sailing for a rest in the Atlantic coast of France. His name is Boris Herrmann. He's well known in Monaco because we do a lot with him. He actually, in 2020, he actually flew the Monaco flag and became the first German to compete in the famous race, the Vendée Globe. And while he's sailing, he has this slogan, "A race we must win, climate action." So it speaks on his commitment for the protection of the environment. And actually, while he's sailing, he carries an ocean sensor to collect data. And he works in collaboration with Max Planck, GEOMAR, and Ifremer. And this data is used worldwide. So let's see. He wanted to be with us. He's not with us, but he's with us thanks to technology. Please, Boris Herrmann.
Monseigneur, cher directeur Calcan,
Your Highness,
everyone joining today. Unfortunately, I can't be physically in Monaco, but it is an honor to send you this video message, as I'm in the unique position to have the ocean as my office, my home, and my playground. But of course, not only professional offshore sailors like me are very much connected to the ocean. We all know that without healthy oceans, we cannot be healthy. Every second breath we take is oxygen produced by the oceans. They regulate the climate of our planet. Notably, they mitigate global warming. Like a huge sponge, they absorb almost 1/3 of our CO2 emissions and more than 90% of the heat energy we are causing with global warming. I have experienced firsthand the impact that climate change is having, even in very remote locations. In 2015, I sailed through the Northeast Passage from Murmansk to the Bering Strait. We have been the very first sailing boat to make the passage without the use of an engine, purely by sail, and we set a new world record. This shouldn't have been possible. The frozen ice should have prohibited the passage, especially for such a fast and fragile raceboat. But we almost didn't even see any ice. It was frightening. Also, we witnessed more and more extreme weather out on the oceans. When we did the passage with Greta Thunberg to New York, we had to deal with 4 tropical depressions in just 2 weeks. We rely on stable weather patterns to be able to do our beautiful sport of ocean racing, but also as a society as a whole. Out there, we are encountering vast amounts of sargassum in the tropical waters. The sea is covered with thick brown carpets that slow us down and extend beyond the horizon. This hasn't been the case 10 years ago. I'm proud that thanks to the support of the Prince Albert II Foundation here in Monaco, GEOMAR in Kiel and the Max Planck Institute for Meteorology in Hamburg, our team can help to better understand climate change and to bring precise CO2 data from the remotest areas back to land. In fact, during the last Vendée Globe, we produced one of the longest ocean data tracks ever recorded and the largest amount of CO2 data within this time frame. I'm very much looking forward to the next years when we will collect further data also in the Mediterranean and the North Sea during the ocean race. I greet you now from Van, Brittany, where we are currently building the new Malizia boat, which will arrive in Monaco in 13 months from now, after just having sailed around the world. I wish you all a great seminar, all the best, and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Boris. Thank you so much also, not forgetting Holly Kova and Ellen Katz from Team Malizia, who made that video possible. It was actually very challenging to get this video on time because they are racing, and it was not easy, but at the end we have it, so we are very happy. And our next speaker is actually the German face of the climate change. This is how we call him, right? He talk on TV, on the radio, he talk in a public school, he raised awareness, he's very committed. That's the story of his life. He told me if we had someday to Google my name, it will probably Mojib Latif, climate change, because that's really his fight. It's one of his lifetime fight. And he's senior professor at GEOMAR, full senior professor at Kiel University. He's president at the Academy of Sciences in Hamburg. He's the president of the German Association of Club of Rome. He is invited to speak very regularly on the media. He received many distinctions. In 2000, he received the Sverdrup Gold Medal of the American Meteorological Society. In 2015, the German Environmental Award of the German Federal Environmental Foundation, and among others. What Mojib told me, he told me, I can only describe what the state of the planet is, but we need a global political coalition. He also told me, I'm quite pessimistic, because 30 years ago, we were already saying kind of the same things that we are saying today. So I don't know what to do to take this to a more concrete level. So Mojib will be talking about how the North Sea and the Arctic region are responding to climate change. And above that, he will present us some solution, because this is really what we want to hear today. Please, Mojib, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Where's the remote control? All right. Thank you. So, dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start with a little movie which you see behind me. And this is the evolution of the globally average surface temperature. It's a kind of climate clock, and I hope you can see it. There are two circles. One is the 1.5 degree circle, and the other circle is the 2 degree circle. So what do these two numbers mean? These are the two numbers that are mentioned in the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement, which was ratified in 2016, so which was negotiated in 2015, but ratified in 2016. In this protocol, the countries agreed upon limiting climate change to well below 2 degrees, and to take action to limit global warming even to 1.5 degrees. Now, if you watch the movie, then you see that we are getting very close to the 1.5 degree target. And at this point, I would like to quote the civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said in his famous Vietnam speech, "There is something as being too late." there is something as being too late. And the former US President, Barack Obama, quoted Martin Luther King Jr. with these words, there is something of being too late, and he added, and if it comes to climate change, this time is almost upon us. So what I'm trying to say is that time is running out, and we don't really have any time to waste to tackle the problem of climate change. Now you see two pictures to the right of this little animation, and these are views on the North Pole and on the South Pole, all right? And you see in the middle figure a lot of red color, okay? So the Northern Hemisphere, and especially the Arctic, is warming extremely fast. If you can read the scale, we had temperature rises of approximately 5 degrees near the North Pole, and the impacts are very clear. The ice is melting and so on. On the other hand, if you look at the South Pole, there is also some warming, but you see also some cooling, all right? And this is largely due to changes in ocean circulation. But the main point I would like to make is, and you see it here in this projection as well, this is the same from 1980 onward, the temperature evolution, and I think now you see very clear that it is the northern polar region that warms most of all areas. But you can also see that Europe warmed a lot during the last 5 years, and so it's not only the land areas, but it's also the ocean areas that warm, the Arctic Ocean, and especially also the North Sea. Now, let me continue. You may have noticed this news, which went around the globe the day before yesterday. The World Meteorological Organization published a press release the day before yesterday, where it says there is a 50-50 chance that the annual global temperature will temporarily reach 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level for at least 1 year of the next 5 years, okay? And this again shows the urgency of the problem. And therefore, we heard it in the introduction by Leila. I mean, we had enough words. It's time to act. And I think this statement by the World Meteorological Organization makes this very clear. Now, let me give you just a little background about the problem that we are facing. Climate change is largely, not exclusively, but largely an energy problem. I mean, the way we produce energy is by burning fossil fuels. We burn coal, we burn oil, and we burn natural gas. And whenever we do this, we produce a gas that escapes into the atmosphere, which is carbon dioxide, or with its chemical acronym CO2. And CO2 is the largest problem, the largest greenhouse gas, or the most important greenhouse gas that produces global warming. And therefore, most of the discussion about global warming is about carbon dioxide. It contributes approximately 60% to the anthropogenic warming. Now, we have reached levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere which is unprecedented in the time human beings are living on this planet. I mean, if you look at the blue curve, the carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere has always varied, okay, between ice ages, warm phases, and so on. But where we are today, you know, where I put this blue ball, this is really unprecedented. But we don't realize it. We have no feeling for this, okay? We have no sense for this because you can't see it. I think things would change dramatically if our sky would turn brownish, ugly, brownish, and if it would stink, right? But exactly this does not happen, and I think this is one reason, not the only one, but this is one reason why we don't act, because we don't have a sense of danger. During COVID, this was different. Okay, so we all realize, hey, that is a danger to our health, okay, and therefore we acted relatively quickly. Now in red you see the temperature. These are data from the South Pole or from Antarctica, and you see there is a relationship. So if the carbon dioxide concentration is high, the temperature was high, and vice versa. And this is nothing new. I mean, we knew this for a long time, that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and that the concentration, the content of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere controls the planet's surface temperature. And we see this in this nice graph, that there is a clear relationship between carbon dioxide, which is the blue curve, and the globally average surface temperature, which is the wiggly curve, okay, and therefore we don't really have a knowledge problem, we have an implementation problem. And this has been also recognized by the Nobel Prize Committee in 2021. The physics Nobel Prize was awarded to 3 climate scientists, Manabi, Hasselmann, and Parisi. I worked with Hasselmann when he did his pioneering work, and the Nobel Prize Committee recognized the groundbreaking contributions to our understanding of complex systems. And complex systems, I would like to highlight this. The Earth system is a complex system, okay? And they did major research on understanding the climate system of the Earth. And in a way, and therefore I'm stressing the complexity of the problem, in a way we are conducting a giant experiment with our planet. And we have some basic understanding of how our planet works, of how the Earth system works, how the climate works, okay? But we don't know everything. And there may lurk some surprises. Okay, and therefore I think the cautionary principle should always hold. So if we don't know exactly what will happen, I mean, then we should not want to find this out, but we should stop before it is too late. Now, just one picture from this groundbreaking work of Manabi and Hasselmann and Parisi. You see here on the right the first computer simulations, how the temperature of the planet may change if carbon dioxide keeps to increase in the atmosphere. So that's the upper panel. And then in the bottom panel, you see what actually happened. Okay, of course, computer models at that time, more than 30 years ago, were not very highly regionally resolving. But what you can see, I think, from a distance is that these early simulations were not really bad. So you see that the northern region warms most of all regions. You see that the Southern Ocean doesn't really warm as much as the northern oceans, that the land warms more than the oceans. So that all has been predicted more than 30 years ago. And once again, and this was honored by the Nobel Prize Committee, we know things for several decades, but so far we haven't really acted to limit global warming. Now, we are talking about the Arctic, we are talking about the North Sea, and the whole world is connected, and one integrating factor is the Arctic, okay? For instance, through the melt of the Greenland ice sheet. So what we see here is since the beginning of this millennium, how the Greenland ice sheet changed. And where you see red color, these are regions of mass loss, so basically of net melting. And you see, a lot of red color, sorry. And so this meltwater eventually enters the ocean and will contribute to sea level rise. So that's unavoidable. The same happens in Antarctica, but not as much as over Greenland, but even over Antarctica, you see some yellow and red spots coming up, and also Antarctica contributes to sea level rise. If we consider Greenland, for instance, a complete meltdown of the Greenland ice sheet would produce a sea level rise in the global average of 7 meters. 7 meters if we have a complete meltdown of Greenland. I don't want to mention the number for Antarctica. Okay, so that's much more sea level rise and stall if we lose the Antarctic ice sheet. Now, we see here the sea level since 1900 on the left. You see the rise in sea level. You see also the acceleration during the last decades. Since we have satellite data, which started in the early 1990s, we have really great data, and we can very precisely measure the sea level rise everywhere on the planet. And on the right, I hope you can see this. We see the European area, and there are little arrows. I hope you can see the arrows, okay? Some are pointing up, or most are pointing up. Okay, this means that sea level has risen since 1970. And the color of the arrow gives you some impression of how much. And in Europe, it's approximately in the range of the global average, so between 2 and 3 millimeter per year. But one thing I would like to point out, because you may wonder, you see also blue arrows in the Baltic Sea. In the northern Baltic, you see blue arrows. So this means, blue arrows means sea level has fallen. How could this be? Why? We are talking about global warming. We are talking about global sea level rise. So how could this happen, that sea level is rising? Well, the answer is very simple. Because about 20,000 years ago, we had an ice age. We had big continental ice sheets. And these ice sheets depressed the land. Okay, and now the ice sheets are gone. And now the land is rising. And this rise is faster than the sea level rise due to the global warming, all right? And therefore, we have a net falling sea level in the northern Baltic area. Now, the color, I don't want to mention this in detail. It's basically this. So if you look into the future, you see, depending on the scenario we apply, that sea level rise by 2150 could amount to 2 meters. 2 meters in 130 years from now. You see the huge range of rises that we see here, and this tells us that there is at least something we can do, okay? So it's still up to us by how much sea level will rise. We can't avoid a future rise, but we can still somewhat controlled by how much sea level will rise, and sea level is rising everywhere except in very small regions like the northern Baltic region, and this is really the integrating factor. Okay, so if Greenland melts, if we have strong warming in the Arctic, you know, this influences all regions, all coastal regions in the world. Now, I mentioned the Paris Agreement of 2015. You can read here, Vive la planète, Vive l'humanité, vive la vie. Okay, that's great. And limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees is even greater. However, we haven't really started to take action. And this is the only thing that matters. That's the global emissions of CO2. And you see, this curve starts in 1960. You see, it's basically only one way, the way up. You see little drops, okay? So, and these were always crises. So in the 1970s, the oil crisis, okay? Then the second oil crisis, then the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the last global financial crisis in 2008. Okay, you always see a little drop in the emissions, but thereafter, after the crisis, you know, the rise in the CO2 emissions resumes. And even after COVID, okay, we see this strong drop in 2020, and now 2021, you know, we had a strong rebound in the emissions. And so what can I say? I mean, we are still going the wrong way. I mean, I can't stay in front of you and tell you everything is fine. Nothing is fine if you look at these curves. I mean, we have to face it. And this, again, demonstrates the urgency of the problem. Now, what can we do? And I would like to finish with this. We have only to look at the sources and the sinks. So the sources of CO2, which are on the left, is basically the burning of fossil fuels. So if this is the major source, we should not burn fossil fuels. That's very simple. Every child would understand this. And the second most important source is land use change, so especially deforestation. So why do we destroy the forests, especially the rainforest? I mean, it simply doesn't make sense. So let's stop it, okay? Let's do everything that it doesn't continue. That's the one side. On the right, we see the sinks, okay? Not everything that we emit into the atmosphere remains in the atmosphere. Just under 50% remains in the atmosphere. The rest is taken up by the land areas and by the oceans. So what is the consequence of this? We should try to increase the efficiency of these sinks, okay? So that's one major challenge for the future. And since we are talking about the ocean, we should try to enhance the efficiency of the ocean sink for CO2, okay? So my last slide is also reserved for a Nobel Prize winner. Let's see, Albert Einstein. I mean, he always had the best quotes, and this is what I would present to you. We cannot solve our significant problems on the same level of thinking we were at when we created these problems. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mojib. Thank you. Thank you. If you can stay with me for another 5 minutes, you stay with me? Yeah. Can you stay with me for 5 minutes? And thank you so much for saying it out loud. Thank you so much for saying out loud that it is not okay. It is not okay. Most of the time, we try to make sure everybody we don't want to make people fear and alarm it too much, but the reality is that it's not okay. So we can say, vive la vie, vive le planète, vive all that. Now we have to take action. And I think this is also what you've been saying. You've been talking about solution, and maybe we will talk about it now. I will open the floor to the audience. If you have a question to ask to Professor, the floor is yours. We have Julia in the room who will pass the microphone. And we will have another round of questions at the end of the seminar. But for the time being, you have the opportunity to directly speak to the German face of the climate change. It's always very hard for the first question, you know. So anyone in the audience? Yes, we have someone here. If you can please stand up and present yourself briefly and be concise in your question. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Just a short question. When you talk about deforestation and we must act, how do we deal with country leaders who believe that the Amazon belongs to them and don't care about the world platform?
Did you hear the question? Yeah.
I mean, you raise one of the most important questions, actually. I mean, this refers almost to everything. How can we convince other countries to follow us? And I must admit, I don't really know. I mean, if we look at CO2, for instance, you know, a country like China has a share of almost 1/3 of the global CO2 emissions, 31%. And so, how do you talk to China? I mean, I'm very strict, I must say. Yeah, still working. I think we can't have unconditional trade with countries like China. I mean, economy is not everything. And so, I mean, we must put regulations on our economy. We see it now, you know, with the terrible war in the Ukraine. I mean, you can't make trade with countries that violate civil rights, that violate human rights, that violate the environment. And I think we should say that economy is not number one. Environment must be number one, okay? And economy second. So economy first, economy second, environment first. I mean, if we don't change our attitude, then I think we are basically lost on this planet.
Thank you. Does anyone want to ask another question to Professor Mojib in the room? Ask you. Okay, you said we have studied enough now, it's time for action. So you are in the scientific part, so you've studied, you made a lot of studies. What would be for you the greater action that one could take at the global level, like the one that could have the greater impact? If like you were head of a state of a nation, what would you try to implement?
Well, the problems we are talking about today, I mean, it relates as well to loss of biodiversity, it relates to climate change, relates to pollution, everything. I think if I would be the Chancellor of Germany, or if I would be the ruler of the world, okay, I would cut subsidies. Subsidies for non-sustainable products. I mean, do you know that the fossil fuel industry receives on the order of $500 to $600 billion every year in form of subsidies? Okay, so cut the subsidies and sustainable products, you know, will prevail. I think that's the trick.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We will take some other questions later. Maybe you can get back to your chair and we'll take some more questions later. As Professor Mojib said, we need political coalition, right? We need to make a real change, otherwise change will not happen. We need to be more courageous, but the problem with politics is that we need to be elected, so it's very hard to have strong policies. So that's one of the challenges. But our next speakers now will be called on stage for the panel discussion. It's our time, it's the moment of our panel discussion where the main question to be addressed will be, can science and explorer work together in finding solutions? And actually, it's very interesting to realize that, yes, they can work together. They actually work together. They collect priceless data that helps scientists and governance forecast and make decisions. So without further ado, I would like to welcome on stage our next speaker, Professor Antje Boetius, Professor Frederik Paulsen, and Mr. Arved Fuchs. Mr. Frederik Paulsen. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's really, when I was preparing this panel, I got to see so very interesting videos, inspiring, and that gives you really the will to be part of the change and to go across the world in adventures and collect data, really. So we will see that right now. We will start with Antje Boetius. So she's a polar and deep sea researcher. She is the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar and Maritime Research. She is professor of geomicrobiology and head of the Joint Research Group for Deep Sea Ecology and Technology at the Max Planck Institute for Marine Microbiology. She has participated in over 50 expeditions on international research vessels, and her recent research focuses on the effect of climate change on the Arctic Ocean. So she's the perfect one to be addressing this topic today. She was awarded with the German Environmental in 2018 and the Federal Cross of Merit in 2019, among others. And for her talent in communicating the importance of research to society, which is very important, she has received several awards, including the Communicator Prize of the German Research Foundation. And she is also a dear friend of Monaco and of the Monaco Blue Initiative, right, as she actively participated at the very first edition in 2010. Please, Antje, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laila. So for the quick statement to kick off the panel, answering the questions of science and exploration, I would like to speak of the little tour I took of the images here. And I would like to disclose that myself, part of my family's history is from the Frisian Islands, as is Frederik Paulsen's history. So my parents, my father's side comes from the island of Föhr, and they have owned the railway of Amrum, and today I'm happy that the AVI not only does research in the polar seas, Arctic and Antarctic, but that we also host a long-term time series in the North Sea of the little red rock island Helgoland and also of Sylt, another of these beautiful Frisian islands. And so when you walk around here, you see these images, and you see when they were painted or photographed, you walk through time. And so science is there and art is there for you to walk through time as a contribution to preserve images and to speak by images or by other forms of art about our culture of the interaction between human and nature. And science and exploration of unknown seas, unknown landscapes is just another culture contribution when you think about it. It is our contribution to give landscapes, seas, situations, animals, plants that we see and discover a name, a voice. And so I absolutely believe in this combination of science, art, and exploration. But let's stand for a moment and think about the North Sea. We've heard in the introduction and also by Tinka some of the great challenges. We've heard that it was always a fight between rising and falling sea levels, different temperatures, and then the change of the network of life in the North Sea. So when I listened to the stories of my grandfather when he grew up on Föhr, and then also my father when he was a little kid, it struck me as a kid that they were always speaking of the fantastic winters with a lot of ice on the islands, where the kids would play with the ice floes. It was absolutely dangerous. They would jump on an ice floe and pretend it's a sailing boat and start sailing on the North Sea. And so today, when you ask a kid born in Föhr or around, they will not speak of any ice floes or cold winters or any of those special things. When we talk to Dutch grandparents, they speak of endless kilometers of ice skating. Today, we have to count the winters that are cold enough. And so I listened closely to Tinka, and she is great because she airs this optimism of how we can change things, how we can believe in change and enhancing nature. But as a biologist, I also have to say, yes, absolutely, there's so much space for improvement, but we also have to remember that there are boundaries to how life and also how us humans can change. And that might be in the heart of the future that we have to explore. Just one thing about animals. Temperature is a key factor in diversification. And in my institute, the AVI, scientists have worked for decades on the question, how can fish adapt to higher temperatures? And while the adults can really well adapt, they can just migrate, go away, the eggs and the larvae have a very sensitive temperature limit. And so when we explore, when we understand, we have to really get the full picture of the network of life, the interdependencies, and the environment and what it does to us humans. So in a moment, I will show a small movie from one of the greatest recent explorations we've done to the Arctic Ocean, where now, and on an even bigger scale, a similar story as in the North Sea happens. In the Arctic, especially the winter time has changed. And I don't know if you've read in the newspaper what happened in March. There was a heat wave in parallel in Antarctica and the Arctic. It was unseen and unheard of that there was a jump of temperatures by 40 degrees. Not 40 degrees plus, of course, but a temperature jump that was never understood. And scientists with their models, with all their knowledge, try now to explore what does it mean. Are these signatures of a chaotic, nonlinear physical behavior already signs we have to attribute to a change that will just speed up, for example, the loss of ice sheets, the increase of sea level? So when you see this a bit about the expedition in a moment, I would like to remind you that part of the solution set that us humans have is, of course, understanding, striving for a better understanding that is the basis, of course, for acting. And very often we hear the wording, well, we know enough to act, and for sure, it is true, but it doesn't replace exploration and science per se. There's so much to be understood about how the seas function, what lives in the oceans, how ocean and atmosphere, ice and land and humans are connected, that we need science even to adapt. We need to explore the planet we're living on. And yesterday I had a symposium where, again, it was said, most likely 90% of life on Earth yet has no name, is not understood. So exploration, getting a perspective of all the life and the landscapes around us, measuring them, saving or producing images of a relationship between environment and mankind is a critical step in science and art of exploration. And the greatest missions we have ahead of us will have to do with breaking also some barriers in science and science communication and education, because we have to bring together knowledge to act of many different systems, not only science, but basically everyone.
Thank you so much, Antje.
Yes.
I think the best way to illustrate what you're saying is to show
That's
the
what
video.
I was just saying. So you will now see this movie, and there you will see how we tried to capture the imagination of people of all ages by just diving into the greatest Arctic expedition around the North Pole for a full year on our research vessel Polarstern.
You can watch now the video. It's a teaser that shows the Mosaic expedition. That's such an emotional video, right? Yes. Extreme images, amazing adventure and exploration. Antje, you as a scientist who witnessed this and had this incredible expedition, what would you recommend as a solution? Of course, sharing the data and the insight is crucial because it gives the decision maker the way and the tools to make decisions. If you were to be a decision maker, what would you recommend?
So the real solution, as Mojib has pointed out, or Tinka, they are really in acting, in avoiding the use of fossil fuels, replacing them, in creating landscapes and enhancing nature so that biodiversity can be enhanced. But there is also a task for science in itself and for exploration, and that is, as I said, bringing people together and raising the interest, the love, and also the speech for nature and all of that unknown life. And many of you who travel will know, once you have been exposed to such landscapes, you carry them in you and you want to think about them, know more, or talk to others about them. So our culture allows us to share knowledge, and creating images, for example, the first color image of wintertime at the North Pole, which you've just seen, they are so important. This is what is left. So in 100 years, the kids, when they want to know how was it in this time, that's all they have. And so while we have to fight for political solutions, we still have to contribute by capturing the way that nature works with us, and hopefully we for nature. And so I believe very much in being out there, being present at sea and in the ice, and just giving that landscape, giving those life forms a voice in our negotiations and our decisions.
So apart from your amazing job as a researcher and explorer collecting data, is there any action that you undertake in your own life, in your daily life, in a lifestyle? Some examples you could give to the audience in the room and following us streaming on the platform, so they can start implementing it in their daily life too.
Well, yes, I believe in the reduction of CO2 and withdrawing CO2 from the atmosphere. So very early, when it was available, I started neutralizing myself, so to say, by compensation technologies that have a gold standard. And that is actually not that expensive to replace, to save CO2 getting to the atmosphere by avoiding coal to be used. And there are offers by standardized companies where one can go and at least help thereby, and that's what I do.
Thank you. We will get back to you a bit later with the other participants, but now I'd like to give the floor to an amazing man. He's passionate, he's committed, he's successful, from pharmaceutical to real estate and from edition to science. Frederik Paulsen is Professor Frederik Paulsen. He is a renowned businessman, academic, philanthropist, and explorer. And he also devotes time to his passion, which are polar exploration and climate change science. He's one of the very few people to have stood on all 8 of the Earth's poles, which is in itself amazing. Professor Paulsen has a deep historical and scientific interest in polar exploration, and is a founding member of the Swiss Polar Institute. He is recipient of numerous awards, including Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, and Officer de la Légion d'honneur in France. And most recently, he was awarded Officer of the Ordre de Grimaldi by Prince Albert II of Monaco. Frederik Paulsen, welcome again in Monaco.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here.
It's always a pleasure, indeed, to see you. I have a few questions for you, if you don't mind. I'd like to know, what are your experiences as an Arctic explorer, participating in deep diving, submersible expedition, and professional research cruises?
Well, over the last 20 years, I've been doing about 3 to 4 expeditions in the polar regions. Most of this expedition contains groups of researchers, and it's fascinating if you look at the theme of what we're discussing today. Most of these researchers, they're actually doing what, if you allow me, passive research. They are measuring, they're determining things that is happening. From my point of view, what is really missing is that the researchers should more concentrate on solutions, because the solutions are actually there. Why is probably 80% of all the research money spent on measuring, trying to understand what's going on, instead of spending 80% of the money for research on trying to find solutions? It's a hypothetical question. The other thing I would like to bring up is the fact that in terms of solutions, there are solutions. I don't think we should become too pessimistic about it. Of course, what you will see here on the paintings around this room is, of course, a world that, if we don't do anything, will disappear in 100 years. These views, these beaches, these islands, they will disappear. That's quite clear. So why don't we concentrate the efforts in terms of money, in terms of research, on solutions? Of course, it's easier said than done, but as I said earlier, the solutions actually are identified and they exist. So how can we federate the politicians that has to make the decisions. How can we bring together the researchers all over the world? Because the solutions are going to come from the research. The solutions are within the researchers. How can we use some group within society, who knows, diplomats or whoever, politicians, that can really change the decision makers in a way that they will actually go ahead in implementing the necessary decisions.
That's very interesting, actually. And is this question the reason why you got interested into polar research and science?
Yes, I think that's what I really want to spend my next few years in, trying to bring together researchers. And I see quite an interesting initiatives that has been happening in Switzerland. The Swiss has actually constituted the first ambassador that will work on science, as a science ambassador. And the kind of science they are looking into is exactly science which is related to the environment, how you could find applied science that we could then introduce to find solutions.
Yeah, actually, thank you for saying this, because actually you said research should be more focused on finding solution instead of assessing the situation. Of course, we need to assess the situation to find solution, but at some point we should stop assessing and start finding solution. I totally agree with that. So what would you recommend to others who would like to follow on your footstep in that sense?
Well, I can give a couple of examples. When we had the large expedition around Antarctica, which was for 3 months, we had, I think, 20 research groups. It was quite interesting to see that on the positive side, actually we saw that the albatrosses are coming back. We see that the whales are coming back. We see that the increase of fish, which has been going back. And what is this? What does all of this have in common? It has one thing in common, is that the countries have gotten together. They have introduced legislation. Particularly, and another very good example is the ozone hole. That was solved relatively quickly by introduction of legislation against freon gases worldwide, and that worked. We, in the expedition, we could see that the ozone hole was almost closed. Of course, there were negative things coming out on this expedition. We are in some of the deeper fjords on the eastern part of Antarctica, where nobody's ever been. We take samples from the water and we find microplastic particles, so they are everywhere. They're really polluting the whole planet. But again, I think with legislation, with the countries working together, we can actually find very effective solutions. But again, the political will has to be there.
Great, actually you advanced my question. So yeah, if you could recommend something, it would be a bit more political will, more legislation, and maybe then we can have a greater impact. Have you personally observed and witnessed changes with the climate change throughout your expedition? Have you noticed the difference between before and today?
Well, when we started about 20 years ago, of course I was very skeptical, but I mean, it's not an issue. We're beyond that point. I mean, it's not even a question whether climate change is happening or not. And I mean, anybody who would start arguing that it might not actually be global warming going on makes himself purely ridiculous. I mean, we're completely behind that point. We really have to focus on solutions now. So,
last question. What would you think we should do to make researchers and research money swift from assessing to finding solutions?
Well, we have to find a way of allocating resources to solutions instead of just spending all this money on just studying the changes. We have to allocate more money into the active scientific programs that will find solutions. And as I said, they exist.
Thank you so much, Professor. Yes, Antje, you wanted to say something?
I'm a science manager, and so I have to say that it's not linear. Huh? We don't have to understand like we observe, diagnose, find, and solve. It's not like that. It's a constant dynamics, a network of solution and acting. And there's always something new. For example, you mentioned ozone hole, right? So Mosaic found that in wintertime, when there is a climate change introduces a certain coldness in the stratosphere that creates a new giant ozone hole, it was just observed by chance. And so the serendipity of science, the constant observation of what is going on, leads to solutions. You cannot always plan them, they are non-linear, but for sure we spend by now most of the funds we have in science globally goes to solution finding, to applied science. But we don't understand our planet fully so that we are protected in the right way. Just think about sea level rise, what we've learned in the past 2 decades. So both is needed.
Of course, both are needed.
Antje, you shouldn't start getting in an argument with me, because then I will tell you that...
I would love to get in an argument with you.
No, because there is tens of thousands of researchers who make their living out of studying the environment. And so, of course, they have a vested interest that this money will go to them and not to go to other types of research.
Yeah, actually, I must say I agree with Professor Paulsen in the sense that obviously we need observation, but as a scientist, what is your goal? I mean, if you start your research with the goal of assessing and observing, it's something. If you start your research and design your research with the goal of finding solution, it's another thing. And I think eventually, yes, today we need more solution-oriented researchers than observation researchers. But we can talk about this. I think it's a very interesting debate. But before that, I would like to give the floor to our next speaker. I mean, when you hear his story, really you think he's a character from an adventure movie. I mean, 40 years experience sailing across the globe in polar and Arctic region. He's like a time witness of climate change. He has covered over 300,000 sea miles. He's an explorer, expedition leader at the Arved Fuchs expedition. He's a writer, he's a journalist. He worked with TV, he worked with school. He advocates for the urge to collaborate as a politics, media, civil society, citizen, to get more concerned citizen. He believes that we cannot force the change and that we need to get to an acceptance level and to an understanding level, which can be argued. I think we can talk about it later, because I personally think we don't have so much time to educate the whole world. Sometimes we need to take a stand and say, okay, this is how it should go. But we can talk about it later. So to know him better, I would like you to see his teaser of his expedition on the screen. Thank you.
The current decade has been declared the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, with the slogan, "The science we need for the ocean we want." The goal is to implement transformative solutions across disciplines and borders for the protection and sustainable use of the oceans. This also includes the mission to improve knowledge of the oceans and to inform society in this regard. In addition to the various scientific expeditions and the monitoring sites worldwide, other ships such as freighters, ferries, cruise ships and sailing ships can support this goal as well. 2 sailing ships can be mentioned as examples here. The racing yacht Sea Explorer yacht Club de Monaco, skippered by Boris Herrmann during the Vendée Globe 2021 sailing race, and Arved Fuchs ship Dagmar Ann during the Ocean Change 21-22 expedition. Both have sailed or will sail in waters for which little or no scientific data has been collected so far. These ships sail the world's oceans as ships of opportunity, using measuring instruments and systems to record oceanographic and meteorological data reliably and autonomously, transmitting these data in real time from onboard ship to scientific institutes. Other devices employed include CTDs that carry out measurements at depths of up to 1,000 meters and water analyzers that can also record the concentration of microplastics. Numerous expeditions have shown over many years that different manufacturers can collect data together, these then being fed into scientific databases such as ICOS to provide valuable information on the climate. In recent weeks, we accompanied Arved Fuchs, who has carried out measurements in the Gulf Stream, on his ocean change expedition in the North Atlantic as far as Greenland. These recordings are also intended to provide information on climate change. Next year, Arved Fuchs will continue his journey and his measurements, taking him to Canada's east coast to collect further data along with Canadian researchers on board. Boris Herrmann too will install measuring equipment to collect ocean data on board his new IMOCA racing yacht, which will bear the name Sea Explorer Yacht Club de Monaco during the race 22-23 and Vendée Globe 24. Thus once more making an important contribution to improving the database on the Southern Ocean.
Arved has written 20 books. He was awarded the German Federal Cross of Merit in 2017. In 2017, also, he received the Environmental Award from the Natural Life Foundation for his life's work. So, Arved, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Laila. So it was a pleasure to see Boris on the screen with this video. We know each other for many years, and we have many things in common. And although we have a totally different approach to ocean sailing, so he's on a high sophisticated racing yacht on the Vendée Globe and other regattas around the world, while I'm sailing a 90-year-old traditional wooden sailing vessel, originally designed as a fishing vessel for the North Sea, and it has been reinforced for Arctic regions. And I've been traveling in the polar area since more than 4 decades now. And when I started out, I used to live with the indigenous people in the Arctic, and they became my teachers, actually, to understand the way to travel and to survive in cold temperatures and polar areas. And when I started out, to be quite honest, it was pure adventure. So there was not much more that I could handle, because it took all my energy and all my capability to get along with this cold temperature with little equipment. So I like to travel light by dog team, by skis, on kayaks, or even on sailboats or whatever. And so if you kind of travel that way, you become a good observer. So because on observing the nature, your life depends on it. So if you do not realize Arctic storm showing up, or if you can't recognize ice which is able to carry you and your weight, or whether it's fragile and thin, so you might break through and you will drown or you will freeze. As simple as that. So you have to understand nature. And so in 1989, for example, I was a member of the Ice Walk North Pole expedition, and we started out from the northern coast of Canada, and we skied about 1,000 kilometers across the frozen ocean. And we also were concerned about some environmental aspects, as the ozone layer, which was a big issue at that time. But I never thought that climate change would affect such an expedition, because it was so cold and the ice was relatively stable. It was moving back and forth because you have tides, of course, and drifting ice. But in general, it was a relatively safe surface and ground to travel across a frozen ocean. This is something you can't do anymore, because the ice has become so thin and fragile, and so there's a lot of open water in between. And since I made many other expeditions, so I suddenly became aware that something was changing to the bad side. And so I somehow read all the papers. I got involved with the people who were scientists and knew more about the background of what was going on in the Arctic. And I said, hey, you're kind of a privileged person. So you have access to areas where hardly anybody can go to. And no matter if you sail across the oceans, or if you travel by dog team across the Greenlandic ice cap or whatever. So you're very privileged. And so you also have to face responsibility. And you cannot come back just telling people how beautiful the area is and what a great thing you achieved by skiing to the pole or whatever was on. So I tried to raise awareness amongst people. And so as Mojib Latif pointed out, so we have anything, but we do not have time to spare. So we have to act now, and this is the important thing. So the politicians wouldn't solve the problems, although they know for decades what was going on. And also the CEOs from big companies, they are more worried about shareholders' value than about the environment, although they also have their families and they might be worried, but they are just somehow tied up in their jobs. And so what we need, I think, is the average people, the population, and that's why we are trying to keep people involved. So, and this is sometimes kind of tricky. So you must not stand there and moralize and tell people what they have to do or what they better not do. So I'm trying to explain it that way, that I'm part of the problem. So I'm just part of the problem, and I have to change my habits as well as anybody else has to do. And so you have to approach the people, and yeah, in an emotional way even. So I think that's the right way to do, because if people get the feeling that something is wrong and that they could change something to the better, then it will be a solution. And then I think it's also a point where politicians will act, because if they understand that people want to change, they will act according to their wishes. I think that's very important. So the biggest problem is, I think, that we think that someone else will solve the problem. This is not going to happen. So we will have to act, and we will have to make the change. And therefore, the Ocean Change project I'm in right now, so it's a combination of science. I'm not a scientist, but with the high sophisticated engineering and digital technology. So they just collect the data wherever we go, and ships of opportunity, because we are an areas where hardly any other vessel is sailing, or very few vessels at least. And we can collect the data, and it will be transferred directly via satellite to the GEOMAR, for example, in Kiel. And so the scientists will analyze the data while we are doing the media work and trying to inform the people, and we take them on a somehow virtual trip along the coast of Greenland or inside the fjord of Greenland, telling and showing them what we are going to lose if we do not act.
Yes, actually, raising awareness is crucial, but you mentioned that it's important that we as individuals change our habit. What habit, for example, do you think we should change?
Myself, or
like you said,
well,
we as
yeah.
individuals.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the food problem, for example, that you can easily change your habit of eating meat every day, for example. So you don't have to be a vegetarian, I think, but you can reduce your meat consumption. This is one thing. Then, driving less car. And so personally, I flew to Monaco because otherwise I couldn't have made it. But and I don't fly inside Germany, for example, anymore, which I used to do years ago. So I think it's not easy to give an advice what the individual has to do. So everybody has to check by himself.
Maybe it's not advice, it's example, because most of the time people think, oh, it's not I cannot do anything, it's other will solve the problem, politics will solve the problem, but actually we need to work all together, and even at the individual level. This is why I think it's good to always give examples so that everyone can have in mind a few examples of what he can do. And the second thing you mentioned was politics also have to take action. Okay, so what action would you like to see them take? Because I'm saying this because at some point we always say we have to change and we have to take action. But that would be even more efficient if we can say how we should change and what action we should undertake.
Yeah, for example, training. So Mojib Latif pointed it out. So it's still, if you look at Brazil, where all the tropical rainforest is being burned for, so in order to raise cattle, which is being exported from Brazil to Europe and to other countries, of course. This is one big issue, and also to sell the wood. And you somehow have to find a solution that they do not chop down the forest. It's also bad for the indigenous people and the locals in general. So stop trading with them and stop buying this kind of wood. And also as far as fuel goes, I mean, we just have the example right now how much the European countries rely on the oil imports and natural gas imports from Russia. So do you think now... And this is something we knew for decades, but we haven't changed anything. Now we are changing it, and all of a sudden it works out. And this is an amazing thing. So you always need the pressure to change something. And if the pressure doesn't come by itself or by realizing the situation, so I think it's us, the population, who have to make the difference. So
what energy source you think is the best to scale up to a global level, for example, if we get to say no more fossil energy?
Well, we will have to establish the
nuclear?
Renewable energy in a much larger scale, actually.
Yeah, it's wind.
Yes, and solar energy, and we do have the capacity. And so a couple of years ago, we had the discussion whether oxygen or hydrogen would be possible to produce because it needs so much energy. But now, all of a sudden, it's a feasible solution because it's kind of it means kind of a storage. So you can by producing hydrogen, you can store energy, you can burn it afterwards. And so even in the northern part of Germany where I come from, so there are many plans of building up hydrogen factories and also offshore factories, because there's a lot of energy through wind energy produced in the North Sea.
Thank you. Antje, you wanted to say something? Maybe your microphone?
I wanted to add an example for biodiversity. So you know that this year has the greatest negotiations of all times for humanity's protection of Earth and nature and us. The 30 by 30 principle, where it should be decided that till 2030, 30% of all nature should be at least managed in a sustainable manner, including indigenous knowledge. And so to realize that, it is amazing what type of knowledge it needs, and everyone can contribute. So your examples of how you say you can be there in the sea and share data, those data can be critical to implement the marine protected area, because they can only be organized if there is knowledge, if there is data, and otherwise they will not be accepted as marine protected areas. And one of the greatest missions we have, it's a mission for humanity, to install the largest Antarctic marine protected area to keep fisheries forever under control and also access to other resources. And that needs presence and measuring and talking about those data, and everyone can contribute, even tourist boats. So to understand that everyone can participate in generating and sharing knowledge, I find this one of the important solutions, really.
Thank you. And I have one question for any of you. Do you think once we have collected data, passed it on to scientists, passed it on to policymakers, do you think we should wait until globally people are enough aware and concerned so as to take action by themselves? Or do you think we should somehow help them take action by telling them what they should do to save a bit of time? Just like we say, I don't know, drug is prohibited, and that's it. I mean, we don't question the law, right? So should we design and implement new laws to gain some time, or should we wait for the whole world to be more aware and eventually die before? Anyone?
Well, of course, when you think about Europe, we are in a gigantic negotiation, and hopefully it will survive the issues with the war, to set up an economic system in which protecting nature and the atmosphere and the oceans is actually then rewarded finally, compared to destroying or polluting the atmosphere. That would be a huge switch buy CO2 tax, for example. If it's expensive to putting CO2 to the atmosphere, more expensive than renewables, it will be the right framework for industry, and they're calling for it, to invest in renewables. So these kinds of basically laws and frameworks are essential for human behavior.
So that would be policies level, right? Legislation.
It is the will of the people, it is the policies we need, and it is then an expected outcome that by this we can control CO2 emissions.
So
the problem is time, of course.
Somehow we have to force the change.
And I think we also have some kind of awareness among the population. So if you just look back, so a movement like Fridays for Future didn't exist, I don't know, 5 years ago. So and it's pretty strong. Even it survived the COVID-19 COVID pandemic, and so it's still pretty strong. And also the acceptance, for example, that people buy electrical cars, which might be not the end of the line, or so the development will not end here. But what I want to point out is that people start to think about making changes, the one or the other way, and so that they are aware that something is not right. And I think this is important. So we do not start at point zero, really. So something has happened in the meantime. And it's not enough, of course, and we have to get going. Also, food-wise, so there are many, I know many people who are vegetarians or vegans or eat less meat at least. So people do change their habits. They're trying not to drive as much as they used to do. Not all of them, but as I said, we do not start from point zero, so we're on our way. Far too slow, but we have to accelerate, of course, and we have to, by all means, we have to achieve what is necessary.
Professor Paulsen, is there anything you'd like to add before I open the floor to the audience?
Yes, I think one of the greatest dangers we have is that there's a certain despair and pessimism. I think we have to try to change the attitude of many people who are losing hope. We have to explain that there are solutions, there are ways of solving the issues at hand, and we have to concentrate on that. That's the message we have to get through.
Thank you so much. It's always clear, short, impactful. Thank you so much, Professor. I would like to give the floor to the audience. If you have any question related to this topic, please feel free. Raise your hand, stand up. Yes, we have a young lady over there. Julia has the microphone, please. You can briefly present yourself before you ask your question, please.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to say this has been a very thought-provoking conversation, so thank you for that. And on that, I also wanted to thank you specifically for the references to indigenous knowledge. Where I come from Canada, I really think that conversation is not often enough had. And so on this, I'm wondering, how can we better incorporate this indigenous knowledge into the context of creating sustainable energy sources and such, not only on a global level, but that are tailored to the specific regional context from which the knowledge is derived?
Thank you. We are going to take 2 more questions and then give the floor to the speakers for them to answer. Anyone want to ask a question? Yes, we have. If you can present yourself briefly before you ask your question, please.
Hi, Toby Wright, expedition painter, Monaco resident. I'm particularly interested by what Professor Paulsen brought up, the ozone layer. I'm just interested in knowing if anyone's looked into research and understanding why that was solved so quickly. And do we have any lessons to learn from that process?
Thank you. We can take another question before we give the floor to the speaker, if there is any. Yes. You want to ask a question? Or no? Okay. Any other question? Okay. You can maybe you have a couple of minutes after, maybe. So we had 2 questions here. Who would like to answer? Yeah.
If you allow me, this last question here about the ozone hole.
Sure.
It's quite interesting because the ozone hole closed after, I don't know, 10 years or whatever it took. But this was done by regulation. For me, it's very difficult to accept because as a businessman, I'm very liberal in terms of how what the government should do. It should get involved as little as possible. But in reality, to solve these problems, we need a strong state. We need a strong government. How did the government solve these problems? To answer your question, most of the countries in the world got together. They knew that there were certain chemicals which were used in processes all over the world that created this ozone hole. One of them actually was in refrigerators. So they took a decision that all of these were being phased out in a 2-3 year period. And that worked. So that's how this problem was solved.
Thank you. Arved?
Yes, about the indigenous people, the knowledge of them. So the thing is that they never wrote down their history or their knowledge. So it was transferred from the parents to the children, and it's really dangerous right now that you lose it, because the people tend to live a different life. For example, so I'm spending a lot of time in Greenland, and so some of the nobody is doubting that there is something like global warming going on. Everybody has accepted that in the Arctic anyway. And but in some parts of Greenland, so they say, well, that's great. So it's warming up a little bit, and the tourist season is going to be longer, and we make more money, and there is more fish stock or different kind of fish we can catch. And then on the other side, you have the hunters that live in a more traditional way, that trying to go out still with dog teams, going hunting walrus or seals or whatever, and it splits up the society in Greenland right now. So because there's, I would say they are the losers, the hunters, because the politic is not really listening to what they want and what they need. For example, in a small village like Sierra Paluk, where I spent quite a bit of time, so the hunters ordered ammunition for their rifles, and they sent them the wrong ammunition, so they couldn't go out hunting. And this is somehow to tell them, well, just move down south and you will have a better life. And but this means a loss of culture, and a loss of knowledge, and also a loss of respect for nature and what nature means to these people. And I can imagine that this is probably the same thing in Canada. So when I used to live in a small village, Grise Fjord, in the very north of Canada, and when I was around the change of the century and the millennium, when I was talking about global changes, they were laughing and saying, well, it's still cold enough, and well, just that's a media thing, and it's, but a couple of years later, nobody would laugh. So all of a sudden, it happened so quickly, and all of a sudden they told me what was changing. They had insects, and in an area which is declared as a desert, it was raining, you had thunderstorms and all these kind of things. So we have to take this into consideration, of course.
Thank you so much indeed. Before maybe they were laughing, and now maybe they are crying. So in between we have somehow to find a solution. Thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to add before I give the floor to our next guest? Anything you'd like to add? Or anyway, at the end, we will give the floor to the audience again, so you can ask any question to any speaker, including Professor Tinka Murk. You can ask any question for her. So you can start writing down your questions so you're not surprised when I give you the floor. Thank you so much. Yeah. Woo! Yes, Professor Paulsen is an adventurer. Until the very end, he's an adventurer. Thank you so much for this very inspiring panel. I have written down some interesting points, and I think we should promote them. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to a special woman. She's also a passionate woman, but she's passionate about art. She's an art historian, and she's the director of the museum Kunst der Westkunst. So she just told me earlier today that Kunst der Westkunst means the art from the West, because I couldn't figure out how to pronounce it. And when she told me it's art from the West, it seemed easier. Kunst, there was Kunst. Since 95, she worked as art exhibition curator for many projects in Germany and abroad, and she published like hundreds of scientific papers, books, and art catalogs. From 97 to 27, she was junior professor. Since 27, she is also senior professor at the Institute of Art History at the Kiel University. Please, warm welcome to Professor Ulrike Wolff-Thomsen, who will talk to us about the power of art in raising awareness and contributing to change. Please, Ulrike, the floor is yours.
So, dear Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, the Museum Kunst der Westküste, founded in 2009 by the entrepreneur Professor Frederik Paulsen, is located in the center of the North Frisian island. On the North Frisian island of Föhr in the small village of Alkersum. We are very honored and thank Mr. Calcagno and his team that the Musée Oceanographique de Monaco has invited us to present the exhibition Northbound, Connected by the Sea, in this magnificent conference hall. You, dear guests, are therefore offered a small insight into the high-class art collection and the unique collection and exhibition concept of the Museum Kunst der Westküste. Since its foundation, the museum has been committed to a clear, defined program. It's dedicated to art created along the west coast in the 4 North Sea riparian states of Norway, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands between 1830 and 1930 under the general theme of sea and coast. The selection of these 4 countries is based on the region in which first seafarers practice coastal shipping between Bergen in Norway and Bergen aan Zee in the Netherlands. In addition, it was mainly fur seafarers, fur captains, who, as commanders, navigated the large whaling ships in the far north. Our collection of over 1,000 artworks consists primarily of painting and oil studies, followed by graphic work by such renowned artists as Edvard Munch, Piet Mondrian, Peter Severin Kreuer, and Max Liebermann. However, the focus is not on classical maritime themes, but on motif walls in which artists have visualized their observation of the changing landscape on the west coast. It is a living and working space of all coastal inhabitants, including fishermen and their families, but also a leisure and tourist space that developed in the last decades of the 19th century. A second collection and exhibition focus is on contemporary international positions, which are also subject to the general theme and at the same time broaden it because it concerns the effects of climate change, migration, mass tourism, and many other current and social relevant questions. It is the historical relationship between the countries with which the museum continues to be connected through exhibition cooperation. In addition, we maintain an artist-in-residence program and invite mostly artists from the 4 countries to take a fresh look at Föhr and engage in an artistic exploration based on their knowledge of their native habitat. What are we concerned with and what goals are we pursuing with this program? We assumed that the MKdW audience brings a special prerequisite with them, because rarely does anyone come spontaneously to the island, but it's mentally attuned at the latest during the 50-minute ferry crossing to get involved with a unique landscape space which is part of the Wadden Sea UNESCO World Heritage Site. You become sensitized, ask questions about insular peculiarities, want to consciously experience the high and low tides, and want to get involved with nature and an industrially distant soundscape, but also get to know cultural features such as the Frisian language and traditional costumes on fur. On the island, you can see the sea receding twice a day at low tide, so that even the neighboring island of Amrum, you can see it in the upper photograph in the background, can be reached on foot. In the lower left photograph is Alcazum with the museum in the middle of the island. On the horizon on the left, the island of Amrum, and on the right, the island of Sylt. In the lower right photograph shows the capital of Föhr, the small town of Wiek, with about 4,000 inhabitants. We see it as our mission to pursue present and future social and ecological questions concerning the sea, to use artistic positions to heighten the sensitivity of all social circles to changes in nature and the perception of nature, but also to pose questions about origin, homeland, and cultural identity. The dialogue between historical and contemporary art plays a central role because through it, the processes of transforming but also continuities become visible. In the following, I'm only able to provide a few rough paths. I'm concerned with tendential developments that are to be outlined. Let me begin by explaining in the first part of the perception of the sea, how the Northern European perceived the sea in the 19th century. In the second part, I'm concerned with continuities. In the third and final part, I would like to show how science and art can work together in the great challenge to protect the world's oceans. Let's move on to the first point. How was the sea received from enemy to friend? Artists have felt challenged for a century to capture what they have experienced and observed at sea, and to deal with a motive that does not stand still, does not lend itself to being a still life, but it's in constant, never the same movement, and has a great spectrum of appearance in color and consistency. Already in the 19th century, we can see a change in the observation of the sea. In the first half of the 19th century, when modern maritime landscape painting was developed, we experienced a struggle with the element. The example on the top left shows the famous painting Monk by the Sea by Caspar David Friedrich, painted around 1810, in which a monk in rear view on the coastal fringe looked out to the sea. Friedrich saw the sea as a metaphor for life, a mirror of individual engagement with being, and a symbol of a metaphysical world order encompassing man and nature. His artist friend, the Norwegian landscape painter Johan Christian Dahl, on the other hand, represented at the bottom right of the painting a more worldly, reality-oriented view. In the 1847 painting Shipwreck on the coast of Finnmark, Dahl depicts the dramatic events surrounding a sailing ship that has crashed on the wrecked rocks of a fjord in northern Norway. In front of an impression mountain backdrop, a rowing boat becomes visible in the bowling sea in the center of the painting. I have no... oh, sorry, good. In the center of the painting, in which several people were able to save themselves. It is difficult to judge whether all the dangers have been overcome because the heavy storm obscures the entire natural area. The exploration of the relationship between man and nature, exemplified here in a shipwreck with an unknown outcome, was a major theme. As a symbol of man's powerlessness confronted with the force of nature, the sea exerted a great fascination on the art public at that time. It was only in the course of the industrial age and after the invention and further developments of the steam engine and the use of the iron and steel in shipbuilding that people believed themselves to be safer for such accidents. But reality told them another story. In the second half of the 19th century, the dramaturgy seems to calm down. The sea and the beach are increasingly perceived as leisure and recreational space. The first strong tourism develops, and with it, the income opportunities of the coastal inhabitants also change. Thus, the Norwegian painter Peter Severin Krøyer, who worked in the Danish art colony of Skagen, also moves away from observing the hard everyday work and hazards of the fishermen. In his work from the 1883, the fishermen enjoy their evening at the beach, their gaze directly towards the sea. But it's not the view on their workplace, the sea, but of a place of power that makes them enjoy the evening. In the 1896 painting by the Dutch artist Philip Sade, fishermen's wives and children look out for their husbands and fathers who are probably returning after a long voyage. Not far from the outer kerk of Katwijk, the women are belonging for the return, and at the same time their thoughts are, will they all return safely? Was the fishing or the trade successful? The well-being of all depends on it. The atmospheric mood speaks for a positive outcome. Let us turn to the next time period and thus to point 2. Are there continuities in dealing with the sea? If we look back at the paintings, a great accordance becomes visible. Men's view of the sea is a phenomenon that transcends borders and continents. As we all know, the sea is not only a mediator between people from different countries, a source of energy, a food resource, a space of rule and trade, a migration route, a bridge and a border at the same time, but also a place of belonging and imagination. But why do we love to look at the sea? What fascinates us about the sea? Why do millions of people travel to the sea every year for their holidays and pay top prices to get a room near the water? To answer this question, I would like to present a project by the Swiss conceptual artist Sophie Kall. Kall traveled to the city of Istanbul, known as a mediator between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara, between Europe and Asia, and met people there, young and old, who had never left their neighborhood and had never seen the sea in their lives. She invited them to travel with her to the coast and captured these moments in videos. As a representative of many touching shots, I would like to play a short film sequence that was shown on Swiss television.
Ausgerechnet in Istanbul, der Stadt am Bosporus. Aus den Bildern und Videos wurde eine Ausstellung. Voir la mer, das Meer sehen, zum ersten Mal.
Perhaps you too will follow my interpretation. The strong inner emotion seems to be fed by his awareness and his own discovery of the huge living and natural space that is new to him. He sees, he smells, he tastes, he feels and he hears the sea for the first time. On things to realize that not only has a powerful impression and beauty taken hold of him, but that he has also become aware of the elemental power and the supra-temporality of the sea and of his own limited time. Man's relationship with the sea and many others examples make this just as clear, is of high emotional quality. No one is indifferent to the sea. According to the marine biologist Wallace J. Nichols, our relationship to the sea is highly complex and deeply anchored in our unconscious. He points out that cerebral researchers have been able to determine that they originated even before human evolution, beyond all perception. In my opinion, this strong emotional power should be exploited to a greater extent, and this brings us to point 3. The question of how science and art can jointly take up the task of preserving and protecting our Earth. Consequently, a central question is how can scientific knowledge of climate research and the more emotional language of art be brought together in project in order to reach the widest possible audience? How can people be addressed who are otherwise less interested in this topic or have already resigned themselves to it? Moreover, how can a bridge not only be built between the North Sea and the Mediterranean, but how can the global challenge of climate change be made visible in a creative way? Of course, it requires everyone's efforts, but I'm firmly convinced that art can play an instrument in the orchestra and that emotions triggered by just looking at the sea can be a force we should use more. One example of an art project illustrates the relevance of the topic. We are all very aware of the threats to marine ecosystems and global warming, which has a major impact on all corals in the world's oceans. The Australian twin sisters, Christina and Margaret Wertheim, did not want to face this without a fight and developed an art project in which the Museum Kunst der Westküste was involved in 2012. It is an art project that takes up the aesthetics and communication of mathematical and scientific theories. This sounds very sober at first. The Wertheim sisters recognize that the aesthetic properties of mathematical geometry are reflected in multiform organisms such as sea anemones, fire corals, and floral animals. Affected by the dying of the Great Barrier Reef, they initiated the international art project, the Hyperbolic Croshaw Coral Reef, which included the fur reef created at the Museum Kunst der Westküste, to be seen here in the photograph. On fur, in Germany, Denmark, and further abroad, people were called upon to crochet coral according to the models. The choice of size, shape, and color was up to everyone. Over 750 people took part, and larger teams met regularly at the museum and also at the Danish Museum Sønderjylland in Trondheim to crochet and, in this way, to jointly draw attention to the crisis spreading across the world's oceans. The participants were not only contributed, but actively decided on the shape of the coral reef. This resulted in a 20 square meter, three-dimensional coral reef, as well as smaller sculpture made of plastic threads, as crocheting was done with woolen yarn, but also with plastic and other materials to draw attention to the problem of microplastics and pollution in the world's oceans. The fur reef is a satellite of this overall project. Meanwhile, more than 20,000 people in 50 cities and countries have participated. Currently, a large presentation of a new reef with 40,000 individual corals, in which over 4,000 people have participated, can be seen in the Frieda Burda Museum in Baden-Baden. The fur reef and also the new Baden-Baden reef are pointed ecological statements and raise awareness for a globally threatened cold and warm water coral reefs. Cooperative, figurative, material, conceptual, artistic, scientific, and playful, all aspects intertwine. This emotional component enhanced by the visual language of art, the touching aesthetics, the haptics, and participation can be an important mediator and a tool to win over broad circles of society and decision makers in business and politics, and initiate impulses and action to save the oceans. Knowing that everybody must be touched emotionally before important and sustainable projects are initiated, we should use the power of art more in our joint efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor, for this speech. Indeed, we're not used to have art as a solution. And actually, it can be part of the solution. So I guess if we have art, if we have science, if we have commitment, if we have politics, if we have us changing our habit, then maybe we can make a change. So I'd like to thank you very much, and also thank Mrs. Klaar Schleuren, who is in this room and who participated actively in the success of this exhibition. Thank you so much. I would like, before I give the floor to Peter Erzig, Frederik for the closing word, to know if anyone in the room has a question to any of the speakers of the day. Yes, please. Maybe you can present yourself briefly.
Well, I'm the Norwegian ambassador to Monaco. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for this extremely interesting day and a fantastic exhibition. I have one question, or a rather comment perhaps, to Tinka Murk, because I think what you said was very interesting. Because what I understood you is that we have to live together, because as you said, one thing is that installations, keep the installation in the sea, because that creates a biotip. But the problem is very often is that exactly to find the equilibrium between industrial activity, human activity, preservation, economic activity, and environment. Just this morning, the Norwegian government decided to have a goal of creating 30 gigawatts of energy through windmills or through offshore wind, which means 1,500 installations by 2040. So it's huge, and the first to complain are the fishermen. And the other to complain are those who said it doesn't go far enough. So is this exactly to find this equilibrium between activity and environment? So just one comment from your side, but I liked your approach, and I think that was important to hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, His Excellency. Thank you. And as Ambassador of Norway, we can only applaud you, because Norway, as we all know, Norway is also a pioneer in the protection of the environment. I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, that Norway is the largest pool of electric car in Europe. Yes. So actually, I've been lucky enough to go visit the country. I produced a documentary film there, and I met a lot of activists, and I was impressed how much the country is advanced in that matter. So thank you very much. Tinka, I give you... And in the audience, if you have one or two questions to be addressed to any of the guests, we will give you the floor.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question, because this is exactly the issue. It doesn't help if you continue thinking in the same way, assuming the fishing should remain the same. And for instance, research on the shipwrecks have shown that the local biomass is 300 to 500 times more per square meter, let's say. And if you would develop a system like the sea ranching, where you allow full ecosystem development and harvesting along with the food web, so not only salmon, not only this, but a mix of lobster, brown crab, cod and whatever, then easily the local production could be tenfold higher, not 10%, tenfold higher per hectare than what it used to be with the fishing practices. It means that other people will start deploying this and harvesting new jobs. It doesn't mean all fishermen have to go away, but if you have 10 times more food production here, you can save space for nature on other places. And I think, what is a crucial space? Because not all locations are of the same importance. So you need a full scope of the ecology, have a few flagship species that you think about. It's work. You need science, you need to understand, but it's definitely doable. And you can go much further than you think now soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tinka. We have another question in the room. And also, talking about electric car, I must say that in Monaco, the policy is really encouraging people to buy electric car with subvention, and it actually works. I think it's one of the solutions we can promote more at a more global level. Please, you can stand up and present yourself briefly.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Carmen, and I'm a student at Sciences Po. Thank you all for your presentations. I had two questions that we can relate. You talked about technology. I have a personal question about whether technology can be used as a means to reconciliate with nature, because we have seen that carbon emissions are very huge in the construction of machines that precisely are meant to absorb these carbon emissions. And another question is, we've dwelled much about the importance of individual level and local scale. Where does the EU stand there? Can we consider that its power can be obsolete in that sense?
What does stand? The EU, you said?
Yeah,
okay.
Or global powers.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can take another question before the speakers can... Is there any question in the room? Another one, maybe? If not, we can start answering. I give you a microphone. Yes.
I understood your question as you asked, like the power.
Can stand up.
Okay. The power of individual solutions versus global, and of course both are needed, right? We had that mentioned again and again. In a way, it's the democratic negotiation process that is needed. There's no other way. Plus, there is of course the politics must be convinced the people that's what the people want. For that, we need a voice and participation. But then there is, of course, also the individual contribution that is not only reducing yourself, so your CO2 footprint, but yourself being outspoken. I just mentioned the story of a girl from Pellworm, another Frisian island, and she has dared with others, Greta Thunberg and other kids, junior people, to go to court for the survival of the island. And so to seek a political action, of course, and to use the existing law or actually demand new laws is also an individual contribution that is a political contribution, you see. So we should be much broader in looking for our role and for our place in negotiating a future. And it can be absolutely on the political side. It can be very much on the side what you can do with your family. And just again, because you know this in Monaco, remember the story about the red coral being almost lost from the surroundings. And just the tiniest protection areas that were dedicated have saved some of them, and they can regrow, okay? So the small things in nature protection, they also count. And I guess that's along the line of Frederik, there is hope for doing more, but everyone has to look for a contribution, of course.
Thank you so much. Is there any speaker here who would like to reflect on this? Or should I take another question? Or should I give the floor to Peter Erzig for the closing words? It's your choice. Okay, I'd just like to add something on your question on how the balance between producing a machine that will reduce the emission and produce emissions. So I think it's a balance. It's like when Arved said, I took a flight to come here. It's okay. I mean, we are not going to stop living. It's all a matter of balance. If someone is traveling to New York but will have a great impact, then he can fly, you know? So let's not be drastic or extremist in that sense, and try to be to have a distance and see the balance between cost and benefit. It's always a matter of balance. Does anyone want to add a comment? Oh, we have another question. That's going to be the last question, and then Peter Erzig.
Yes, thank you.
Hello.
My question is for Mr. Mojib Latif.
Could you present yourself, please, briefly?
Patrice Chinner from Paris, in France.
Okay.
To Mr. Mojib Latif, in your very nice presentation, there was a graph about the oscillation between temperature and dioxide carbon in Antarctic, and over a very, very long period, over 1 million years. How can you explain the so low values? It was -8 degrees, and with and at this time there was no anthropometric contribution.
These were data from Antarctica, and so temperatures are low around or in Antarctica. Okay, so this was not the globally average temperature, this was the local temperature in Antarctica. Okay, and therefore the range of the temperature change was also much larger, because the local change is much larger than the global change. All right, but since I have the microphone, maybe I can say something on taking out greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. I think we need to make a decision here. What do we really want? Do we want to make huge financial investments in keeping fossil fuels alive and building a completely new infrastructure to take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or do we want to spend the money to go into renewable energy? I would argue for the second, right? And because we can do everything if there is the political will, if there is enough money, and nobody can tell me that there is not enough money. Yes, there is enough money. For war, there is billions of dollars or euros from one day to the other. So we don't have a lack of money, okay? There is money. And the third thing is we need to change the way of living. And I think the formula is very simple. Less is more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, indeed, there is money. There is money, it's called death. But actually, I think it's very interesting because what you said is that we have to change. And I think it's one of the conclusions we might keep in mind. Yesterday, I saw a reportage on the news. They were talking about the problems with desertification because it's raining less and less. So in terms of agriculture, it causes problems. And now the workers and the government try to subsidize and invest money into finding solutions to help the agriculture tackle this water problem, instead of maybe changing the process or relocating somewhere else when there is not this problem. So I think one of the biggest challenges is to actually change the paradigm, change the way we think, change the way we used to work, and not try to keep the same way and invest so that to make it possible, even if we know it's not possible to have the same life today than we had before. So I think it's very interesting. Before we close the seminar, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Ambassador, Maritime Ambassador, for the closing word, Peter Erzig.
Afraid that it's me who is standing now between you and the drinks outside. But I would like to say a few closing words. And as we have realized, we have almost reached the end of our seminar today. And on behalf of the Oceanographic Institute and the Museum Kunst der Westküste and Professor Paulsen, I would like to thank all of you for joining us here today, either in person or online. So we had a number of online participants. So thank you for joining us. I also would like to thank our speakers and our moderator for highlighting us on the specifics of the North Sea and the Arctic, and for sharing with us their passion and enthusiasm for the protection of the ocean. Special thanks go to Frederik Paulsen for his generous support. It is thanks to Frederik and Robert. I understand, Robert, that you have visited the museum on Föhr, and the idea came up, so thank you both very much. Without these activities, we wouldn't have the exhibition here today, and the seminar would not have been held here today. So thanks for the support. I also like to thank you for the opportunity to work on this project as an advisor to the Oceanographic Institute. That is greatly appreciated, as well as the excellent cooperation with Pierre Gilles, who is the Ocean Policy Officer here at the Oceanographic Institute. I think that this seminar has indicated how much we can do. We just heard about what we can do. We have to act, we have to do something. But also how much we have to do in order to save our common heritage. And our common heritage is our seas and oceans, 70% of the surface of the planet. New ideas, new concepts, and new solutions developed in the North Sea and the Mediterranean can potentially be transferred to other parts of the world and guide us in achieving the needed balance between protection and use. I have talked about this before, and it came up later on in the discussion. We need a balance. I think the ambassador just mentioned that, the balance between economic use and protection. As Monsignor pointed out, art and science can work together, and in this case, we have just heard about this, art can be a great catalyst in raising the awareness for the needs of the ocean. And actually, this is exactly why the Oceanographic Museum was founded here in 1910 by Prince Albert I, with the vision to bring art and science together, and this was obviously very successful. I very much hope that this seminar may initiate a dialogue between those dealing with the North Sea and the Arctic and others dealing with the Mediterranean. And I also hope that our discussions will get you to support the activities of the Principality of Monaco. Laila has mentioned that at the beginning, and the Oceanographic Institute in favor of the ocean. So we need support, basically. Northbound was the title of both the exhibition and the seminar. In fact, the Oceanographic Institute will soon take you further north and also further south to the North and the South Pole with a new exhibition. Polar Mission, that is the new exhibition, will open its doors to the public on June 4th and invite visitors to discover the polar environments, both northbound and southbound, to use these expressions again, in a new way. So this is a new exhibition coming up. We will follow in the footsteps of the great polar explorers, and in particular those of Prince Albert I, who led four expeditions to Svalbard between the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. The new exhibition will talk about the richness of the fragile polar environments as an extension of our discussions here today. We will talk about balances, but also about imbalances, and we will discover, as we did today, paths and solutions that will allow us, and it's never too late, to give the unique polar biodiversity a chance to adapt and to resist to the maximum. We will also present what the Principality of Monaco and its protagonists, among them the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, do in protecting the polar world. And finally, a certain space of the exhibition will be dedicated to the collections that Jean Mallory, the great anthropologist and explorer, gave to the Oceanographic Museum a few months ago. And we wish to bring this invaluable collection to life for the general public as a testimony to the impact of environmental imbalances on indigenous people, on the indigenous populations. And that came also up in the presentation by Arved Fuchs. So I urge you to put June 4th in your calendar in order to come and discover this fascinating exhibition right here at the museum. And once again, thank you for attending this interesting seminar here today.
Thank you so much, Peter. Indeed. Thank you so much. Would you like to stay here with me for a minute? Yes. Would you mind staying with me for a minute?
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Just a couple of information to be shared with you. The recording of the seminar will be available online. Also, summaries of the discussion soon will be available online. On behalf of the organizer, of course, I'd like to thank Peter. I'd like to thank the Oceanographic Institute, the Museum Kunders West Coast. I said it correctly. And also Professor Paulsen for your participation. We said a lot of very interesting things today, don't you think so?
But yeah, but we need the action.
Yes, yes, exactly. Less word, more action. We said indeed that we have collected enough, collected and analyzed enough data to know that we have to act now. We said that we should not be pessimistic because there are solutions, so we should focus on the solution. We said also that we need a political coalition, more legislation, stronger state, stronger government. We said also that we need to relocate maybe in finance, in investment, and finance more solution-oriented research. instead of the research that focus on the observation only, even if we need it. And we said also, of course, that we as individuals, we have a role to play. We have to change our habits, and we have to live in a more sustainable way. So of course now, sometimes it means maybe losing a bit of comfort. Okay, but we cannot change the world if it doesn't start with changing our habit. At some point, we have to be responsible of that. For example, some people like Tinka said, if it's under 20 kilometers, I ride my bicycle, right? So she's a sportwoman. Maybe we cannot. It's easy in the Netherlands and in Belgium, maybe. Some other people said, I have reduced my meat consumption, and studies have shown that it is actually a very good solution if we want to tackle the climate change. Well, there are solutions. Let's focus on that. And most importantly, let's not be hypocrites. Let's try to really take action, and let's make the movie Don't Look Up stay just a movie and doesn't become our reality, because scientists, they have done their job. They have told us everything that needs to be told. So now it's up to us. So we count on you. And let's keep the discussion open online, because it's a matter of dialogue also. Thank you very much for being here. And also, you are all invited right now for drinks, for le verre de l'amitié, which is in the Salon d'Honneur. Thank you very much. We count on you, and let's meet up on the social network and the website of the Oceanographic Institute. Thank you.